We're all good. Okay, so brilliant. There's lots of you here today, which is brilliant. As I said earlier on, hopefully you're in the right place. This is a PAS workshop on the Biodiversity Net Gain Consultation. And today we're doing a bit of a deep dive around offsite biodiversity net gain delivery and opportunities for local authorities. Just sort of some logistical type things. We're going to keep you on mute to start with, and I'll run through the agenda in a minute so you'll see why that is. Yeah, but what am I trying to say? Yes, please do use the chat if there are any, you're having any issues with any of this, or you just want to raise anything to us, please do use the chat. Once we get started, we're going to run some discussions. We're going to go into breakout rooms. Once we get started on that, it would be great if you've got the broadband capability, if you could turn your cameras on, because it's lovely to see people, and then obviously you'll be off mute. The focus for today is really to get your input, to hear from you guys around what you think around these issues, what your questions are, what you want to know more about. And that's both to inform Defra. We've got Defra colleagues in the room today, and they're going to be helping with facilitating and note-taking. And also we'll be doing a bit of a summary report from all these workshops for Defra with some informal feedback. But it's also to help us. We're doing a wider project, getting local authorities ready for biodiversity net gain. So it will obviously help us in terms of making sure that we're focusing the right resources in the right places for you guys. So, and just to say, if you haven't heard of the Planning Advisory Service before, we're a team of 9, and we run projects mainly for DLUC, basically helping local authorities with planning, and those can be a range of issues from new policy approaches. So this year we've been doing some bits on free ports design guides, as well as city centres, but we also do offer support around getting plans over the line, local plans over the line, and also on development management. And we do reviews for councils as well of their services. So that's what we do. This workshop is part of a project that I'm leading, getting local authorities ready for biodiversity net gain when it becomes mandatory in winter 2023. I'm Becky Moberly. I've got a couple of PAS colleagues helping me out today, Rachel and Gareth, so you might see them. We've also got some colleagues from Defra on the line, and I'm just going to zip through to see everybody. So we've got Emily and Kevin and Maddie and Max, all from Defra, and we've also got Fliss, Amanda, and Nick from Natural England, and I'm sure that I've forgotten somebody, so please do shout off if I've forgotten one of you guys. Oh, Mark from Defra as well. Sorry, Mark, that wasn't nothing personal. So you will probably be in a room with one of those guys a bit later. Okay, right, I'm going to get started then. Actually, I'm going to have a gulp of my tea first of all before it gets cold. Right, okay, so just to run through what we're going to do today, I'm going to give a quick introduction to cover what we know about offsite biodiversity net gain from the Biodiversity Net Gain Consultation, and also what your roles in that are as local authorities. Then we'll have a couple of discussion sessions. So the first one will be focused on your role in planning policy and decision making, and the second will be around some wider opportunities around providing offsite gain sites and habitat banking. So the focus of today is definitely on those discussion sessions, and we will definitely finish by 4 p.m, if not a bit earlier. Okay, so I'm just going to run through bits and pieces in the consultation. I sent out these slides to you beforehand, so there's quite a lot of detail on them, and they're a bit dry, but you have got these slides if you want them. We'll be putting them up on our website as well in due course. Just to say what I should have said at the beginning actually is we are recording this first section. We're not going to record all the discussions and things, so you can be fairly open in those and know that you're not being recorded, but we will share either this session or the previous one we ran on the same topic last week, just the beginning bit, this bit. So you've got the recording of this, so don't worry if you don't got all the detail. I'm aware that some of you will be very familiar with this topic and have probably read the consultation itself. Others of you may be less familiar. What I'm trying to do is get us all on a bit of a level playing field in terms of our understanding and what we know, so that when we come to the discussions, hopefully we're all sort of coming from the same place. So my apologies if this is already all known to you. You can have a little snooze for about 10 minutes and then I'll give a big shout and you can wake up when it's done. Okay, so in terms of just generally on offsite biodiversity net gains, what do we know? From the consultation, we know that both mitigation and spatial hierarchies apply. So when we're talking about the mitigation hierarchy, what that means is that you should be avoiding impacts first. Only if you can't avoid them do you mitigate for impacts, and then only as a last resort do you resort to compensation. And that's something that's embedded in approaches to biodiversity and nature conservation already, and that's very much the foundation of the biodiversity net gain approach. The spatial hierarchy is around where those biodiversity net gains should be delivered, and it's very much around on-site delivery is the first priority, local off-site as where you can't deliver your BNG on-site, and then only then do you move into the wider off-site market, so beyond the local. The consultation sets out that developers can deliver off-site biodiversity net gains either via their agreement, well, via other land holdings, that may be their own, or via agreement with landowners, or they can purchase biodiversity units on the market. And I'll go into that a bit more. Delivery locally will be very much encouraged, and that will be encouraged by national policy and guidance, but it's also something that you can encourage through your policies. So in your local plan, you can help sort of direct delivery locally. It's also incentivized by the Biodiversity Metric, which is the way that biodiversity net gain is going to be measured. There's a spatial multiplier in there, which basically means that the further away from where the habitat loss has occurred, the more units you need to supply to compensate for those. So the priority is on-site, followed by local off-site, but you can deliver outside the local area if local opportunities are insufficient. I'm going to talk a bit more really around how to encourage those local markets and what consultation says about that in a second. It's really important to think about how this links up to wider delivery. So through the Environment Act, we're going to have local nature recovery strategies coming in alongside biodiversity net gain, and those alongside other spatial nature strategies. So there may be things that you've already got in place, because the LNRS won't be in place in a lot of places apart from where they've been piloted. So that might be that you've got things like biodiversity opportunity areas in your area, a green infrastructure strategy. Those can all be used to target delivery of offsite biodiversity gains. And you can do that again through your local plan. You can specify that in policy. Again, the biodiversity metric has a multiplier that covers this, and links to local strategies are incentivized by that. So again, if the biodiversity net gain is being delivered in an area that sort of links into one of these local strategies, it then basically is a multiplier that allows you, it means that you don't have to deliver as many units as you would if you were delivering outside that area. Okay, so in terms of these biodiversity net gain, the important thing is that they need to follow the biodiversity metric rules. So there are quite a lot of, I can't remember exactly how many rules listed in the biodiversity metric. They're in the guidance that accompanies it. But they include, one of the main ones really is that it refers to the need for habitat replacement to be at least like for like. So it has to be at least as good as, if not better than, what's being lost. And that's a really important concept. They'll need to be maintained for at least 30 years and to be secured through a conservation covenant or a planning obligation. Conservation covenants are another thing that's coming through the Environment Act. They are basically a way of securing land for the long term for nature conservation, and also for other reasons like heritage. they're not covered by the Biodiversity Net Gain Consultation, but there will be more information coming on those soon. A developer will need to, or whoever is providing the offsite biodiversity gain, will need to register it before the biodiversity gain plan, which is a thing that accompanies the planning application to show what the developer uses to show how they're delivering biodiversity net gain. They will need to be registered prior to that approval of that plan. And I'll talk a bit more about the register in a minute. Defra are going to publish further guidance on that, and that's what we're going to discuss a bit later, because they really want to know what's most helpful about this in terms of guidance, what you need to know. Off-site habitat doesn't need to be created or enhanced before a site is registered or allocated to a development. So basically you can do the creation or enhancement after you've got approval of your biodiversity gain plan. There's a suggestion in the consultation that Defra are looking for views on around whether that habitat delivery should commence no more than 12 months after approval of that biodiversity gain plan. And that's in there as well. Okay, so that's offsite biodiversity gains. The market. Basically anyone who owns land can create or enhance habitats for the purpose of selling biodiversity units, and that's as long as they meet all those requirements that we were just talking about for offsite BNG. But they also have to show no significant adverse impact on protected and priority habitats. So beyond, basically you don't want to end up with a situation where you're destroying one habitat to create a new habitat so that you can demonstrate BNG, which and as a landowner, if you own land of the planning authority, that counts for you. You can sell biodiversity units for your own land, but also act as a broker for other third-party units. The key thing here is that whatever approach you take as a local authority, you don't undermine the local market. So you have to comply with the same rules and requirements that apply to other suppliers, and also can't direct developers to purchase biodiversity units from a local authority in preference to other suppliers that can deliver equivalent or better outcomes. Also, local authorities won't be able to charge developers a tariff, a sort of area-wide tariff, because you have to make sure that your off-site gain is registered and allocated to the development in question. So there has to be a link between the development that needs the biodiversity net gain and the units provided. In the consultation, there's also a question around whether developers could use or sell excess biodiversity units where they've basically managed to get more biodiversity net gain on site than they need, so more than the 10%, and whether they should be able to do that, and they could easily use that for other developments they have themselves or sell them. Defra don't propose to establish a centralised trading platform for biodiversity units, or for the UK government to take on other roles which could be performed by the private sector. Okay. So habitat banking. Habitat banking is where habitat is created or enhanced in advance of development. So this is where you can start thinking about habitat and creation enhancement before you necessarily have a link to a particular development. It's not going to be a requirement, but it will be encouraged through policy. And it's really useful because it can help smooth out supply or demand and make sure that habitat units, biodiversity net gain units, are available for sale when they're needed by developers. So helps avoid issues with delays due to needing to find the right units. From an ecological point of view, it's really positive, because we would rather see habitat creation and enhancement before that habitat is actually lost. So just ecologically it works as well. Defra are really looking at how they can best support this, recognising its benefits. So we're going to talk a bit about that, what you need to know about habitat banking and how it might work in your area. Just to flag that there's this date of the 30th of January when habitat creation and enhancement for biodiversity needs to be done after. The 30th of January is a key date. Is when the Environment Act first started going through Parliament, And it's really because biodiversity net gain was never a sort of legislative idea before that. Obviously, you don't want to be in a situation where people who've done works prior to that suddenly start saying, oh, well, yes, I can start selling my units, because it's not going to be a gain. Also, just to bear in mind, that date's important because it's also the baseline for biodiversity net gain, after which, if there is deliberate deterioration in habitat by developers, you can refer to that to say, right, you need to go back to that as the original baseline for calculating biodiversity net gain from. So that's important, where we know that sometimes developers do go into sites and destroy important habitats so that they can say that they don't have a value to begin with. So that date is in there as well for that reason in the Environment Act. Okay, so just in terms of habitat banking, you can create that in advance, but once the units are sold, they still need to be secured by a legal agreement and registered in the same way as other offsite gains would be. Okay, so I've talked a bit about registration. There's a proposal for a national register to be set up, which will be publicly available. It will have clear criteria to ensure that sites are providing legitimate gains for biodiversity. It is for sites that already have plans for habitat creation and enhancement and a link to development. So it is not a platform for landowners to advertise potential BNG offsite areas or to use for habitat banking. It's very much a register for those sites that already are being used as units linked to a particular development, and to make sure that there's a record of where all those sites are. If for a developer that's submitting a biodiversity gain plan, if they are doing offsite net gain as part of that plan, they will need to register those offsite net gains, or the landowner that they're buying the units from will do. Again, the site will need to be subject to a legal agreement, so either a conservation covenant or a planning obligation. And habitat management and monitoring plans will be required. An important thing to note about those is that there will be a register operator who will assess whether the application to go on the register meets criteria, but that register operator won't check the content of those habitat management and monitoring plans. So I know one of the things I was concerned about when I sort of first read about the register was that you might end up with some kind of duplicate system where you've got the local authority looking at the biodiversity gain plan and the habitat management monitoring plans, and then also the register operator. That's not going to happen, because it'll be more of a just checking that that's there rather than checking the content. So the content of these will be managed either via the planning obligation via the local authority or via these new conservation covenants, and there'll be a registered body that's in control of those who will check the contents of management and monitoring plans. But I think that's something that's useful for you to know as well in terms of the requirements on local authorities here, because you know that there's obviously you know, a lot to be looking at and checking, as well as the planning applications themselves. Okay, and just to say that on-site units won't need to be registered, but Defra are looking at how this information can be included or linked to on the register. Okay, so I guess just sort of from this perspective, I guess it's just worth saying that, you know, this is a consultation, very much looking for feedback. So anything that comes to you as we're talking this through and you think, oh, I'm not quite sure about that, you know, Defra are really looking for, we want to hear from you today, but also for you to respond to the consultation. So just moving on to statutory biodiversity credits. These are credits sold from the UK government to developers. The key thing is that they are there as a last resort in case the market can't meet demand for biodiversity units from day one, and basically to avoid delays in the planning system. So the preference will definitely be to deliver net gain on site, off-site locally, and then through the wider market available beyond the local area, and only as a last resort where developers demonstrate that they can't do any of those things would they resort to going to these credits. The preference is that that will all be sorted before the biodiversity gain plan gets approved. Again, further guidance to support decision making is being planned. So we want to hear from you around what guidance you want on that and how it might work for you. The consultation also asks if there are alternatives to that scheme. So that's been set up as a last resort, as the sort of best way that's currently being thought of doing this. But if you've got ideas around how it could be done better, then, you know, obviously want to hear from you on that. There'll be a price review to determine what the price for these statutory biodiversity credits is going to be. It's important, it's just for those national biodiversity credits. It's not for any other, you know, for units locally, but it's just for those credits themselves. And that's the initial credit price will be published in advance of BNG becoming mandatory. There'll be a digital sales platform to help facilitate all of this. The revenue from those credit sales will be invested in strategic habitat and creation and enhancement to deliver long-term environmental benefits. But the key thing now is that you won't have a link between the development and the credit scheme. That link will be lost, so it won't deliver locally to that credit scheme. It could be anywhere in England. So it needs to meet all the other BNG requirements and as on and off-site gains. But there's not that link to particular development. Okay, so I'm just going to take another gulp of tea. So that's what it says in the consultation. The way we're sort of running it today is to think about what it means for you guys as planning authorities and what your different roles might be in terms of off-site biodiversity net gain. So, I mean, I guess the key role is really as a planning authority, and that's both in setting policy. So thinking about what policies you might want to set in terms of thinking about off-site biodiversity net gain and to encourage delivery of biodiversity net gain locally. We know from all the conversations we're having with local authorities that that's usually a key priority politically, that you know, biodiversity net gain doesn't go outside the local area. But also you might want to be thinking about how it contributes to local strategies, the local nature recovery strategy and that sort of thing. So how does that fit in with policy? Also how, and then we move on to development management decision making. So how are you going to determine planning applications that have off-site biodiversity net gain as part of the biodiversity net gain plan? And also how are you going to determine and decide whether a biodiversity gain plan itself can be approved? And it's important to note that those two things might not come in at the same time, because the requirement for a biodiversity gain plan is a pre-commencement condition rather than necessarily happening at planning application stage. Okay, so there's that side of things, policy and DM. And then if the council owns land, they may be thinking about providing off-site biodiversity gain on their own sites, and that can be if you have a big rural land holding, but it can also be for things like parks and open spaces and thinking about how to facilitate nature close to people. And obviously with COVID, you know, that's become a real thing that we were particularly interested in. So that might be something that the council wants to explore, and obviously also offers a funding mechanism for enhancing and improving those sites. And then habitat banking. It may be that the council wants to be involved in some way in a local habitat bank, and that might be just facilitating, bringing partners together to do that. There's a lot, usually interest from local partners around this. So some of the wildlife trusts are looking at this kind of approach in different places. You may be thinking of acting as a lead or just a partner in setting up and running a local habitat bank. Again, interested in talking about, you know, what you're doing already on this, what you want to know more about, what are the issues. Okay, so that's all I was going to run through. I'm just going to have a quick flick in case there's any questions that we need to cover. I can see that Nick is ably covering some of those in the chat as we go through. I'm just going to get me my cursor in the right place because I haven't been able to look at the chat as we've been going through. Is there anything, just double checking with anyone else? Is there anything we need to pick up in the chat in terms of questions?
I think, Becky, that a lot of this will be picked up in the breakout rooms, and perhaps when we come together at the end, if there's any questions remaining here, we could pick up as a group.
Yeah, because looking through it sounds like there are definitely issues that we could pick up. So we'll obviously save this chat, but please do remember your point and bring it up in your room when we go there. Okay, so moving on to the discussion part. Okay, so we're going to be running 2 sessions. The first is particularly around planning and your role as a planning authority. So we want to know, where do you need more clarity on offsite delivery and related aspects in regard to both setting planning policy, but also making planning decisions, including approving a biodiversity game plan? So it's thinking about what you're doing already, what the challenges might be, but also if you've got any examples of how this is already working and what's working for you and how that might best be done. I mentioned already that more guidance is going to be provided to support decision making. What should this guidance cover? What other guidance and information would be helpful beyond what's proposed there, which is around the sort of offsite and local on-site and local offsite options, and how to decide whether developers adequately considered those? When do you need the guidance? And also, do you think there's a role for accreditation or standards, so it makes it easier to decide whether a offsite delivery is adequate or not? Okay.